Hi, welcome to another edition of This Issue. My guest this time is Lisa Savage, who's the local coordinator for Code Pink in Maine. Lisa, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Bruce. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you here. Tell us about Code Pink. People might not have heard of that organization before.
Code Pink is an international organization of women, a grassroots peace group working actively to end wars and stop the next war. Afghanistan would be one area that Code Pink's working on, but the war in Iraq, Gaza, Honduras recently had a delegation from Code Pink try to work with women and male allies, and part of our focus is communicating with Congress, but that's a small part. So.
Where did the whole pink thing come from?
Well, you might recall that back when the War on Terror began, there was a series of color-coded levels of security threat. And so the founders of Code Pink, Medea Benjamin, Gail Murphy, and Jody Evans, were trying to come up with something that would communicate that they were alarmed and worried, but they did not think that violence was the right answer to our security situation. So they thought Code Pink would fit into that structure, and also it's kind of a fun color. People kind of get a smile on their face when you go pink. So.
Code Pink has been very sort of famous in Washington, D.C. for sitting in various hearings and people dressed in pink clothes and holding up signs and banners. And so they've been very active in D.C. and around the country.
Lots of citizen lobbying, going to the hearings, and just knowing who the representatives are in our elected government and stopping them in the halls and saying, you know, we'd like to talk to you about the war. They've had a lot of success with that, actually.
So you live in Solon, Maine, and you're what do you do for a living?
I'm a high school teacher. I teach ancient history to ninth graders and teach a class on Holocaust and other genocides as an elective to upperclassmen.
All right. How long have you been a teacher?
I think this will be my 16th year school teacher in the fall. Yeah.
All right. Well, in the last few months, you've been pulling together the peace movement around the state to work together on Afghanistan, because it's sort of a new issue. It was always kind of left to the side as we were all working on Iraq for a long time. But what is it that has brought you into this Afghanistan issue?
Well, Bruce, it was fairly clear when Barack Obama was running for office that he considered Afghanistan the good war. He said that as much. And he said, I'm not against all wars, I'm against stupid wars, and he was talking about Iraq at that point. So it was fairly clear to the people in my local peace group that Afghanistan would become a focus if he was elected. And I don't think any wars are good wars. I don't think that Code Pink would say any war of aggression is a good war. And, but Afghanistan, particularly from a historical standpoint, is a quagmire, is not an easy situation to understand, much less operate effectively in, and sort of had been swept aside as people focused on the fact that invading Iraq seemed like a very bad idea. So we're kind of returning to a subject that many of us have thought some about, but needs to come to the front of our consciousness, particularly right now.
And so what are you trying to do here in Maine with the peace movement?
Well, what we thought we'd do is try to organize ourselves around meeting with all the congressional delegation of Maine. Maine is a small state. We only have 2 representatives, and we have the same 2 senators as everyone else. And so it's a pretty doable task to say, let's try to meet face-to-face with all 4 of them and express our concerns about the plan to escalate in Afghanistan. Let's ask questions like, what would that accomplish? When would you know you had accomplished a goal there? What would that look like? How much is this going to cost?
And so how is it coming, trying to get these meetings with the Maine congressional delegation?
Well, you know, the beginning of this effort back in February resulted in meetings with Mike Michaud, Congressman Mike Michaud. And so we've met with him both in district, and I met with him in Washington, D.C. as well. But as far as meeting with the senators, what we decided to focus on as the statewide coalition, when we came together in June, we said, let's go for the August recess of Congress. This is when your Congress people will come back to district, and they specifically do that in order to meet with their constituents and hear from them. So we started back in June, really early June, asking for those meetings and working amongst ourselves to say, what will our message be in those meetings? Who will go to those meetings? What will the logistics being of communicating about this topic?
And so what has been the response? I assume you've requested the meetings. What have the senators said to you about the meetings?
Well, both the senators' schedulers, they have special people who do that job, have said that the senators would like to meet with us, but they are very busy, and that the schedulers will do their best to schedule a meeting. I said politely, but I thought it was pertinent that both the senators had time to escort Secretary of Defense Gates to Bath Iron Works to look at building weapons, and that I thought that they could find time to meet with a statewide group representing many of the peace activist groups throughout the state, from Bangor and the coast down to the southern border, and that I thought that they could find time to do that during the recess. That's the purpose of the recess.
But so far they've not then scheduled a meeting, so you've started a postcard effort. Tell us about that.
Yeah, this is a Code Pink idea that was used in Florida successfully. Code Pinkers in Florida, led by Lydia, were having trouble getting a face-to-face meeting with their senator there. So after many tries and failures, they had some postcards made. So I have made some postcards like those. There's one for Senator Collins and there's one for Senator Snowe. And the back of the postcard has a series of questions that came out of a meeting in June where the peace groups from around the state came together and did some consensus building about what is our message. So the questions on the postcard: you voted to authorize the war on terror. When will you know it has succeeded? What is the goal? Once achieved, how will we exit? Then how do you justify military actions as a means to control or reduce terrorism? And then do you think our economy should be dependent on military contracting? Obviously, conversion of the Maine economy is also a goal that's related to war funding. And so these postcards are trying to communicate with the senator, your constituents want you to stop funding endless war. And then it lists the many, I don't know if you could see that on camera, the many organizations who were represented there when we got together in June. And there's a space at the bottom for a constituent to add their own question or focus. The first one that someone signed for me yesterday said, when will we investigate torture? Related issue. And the purpose here is the constituent would fill in their name and address information here in the return address box, and so that would show the senator that this is a real constituent. Then rather than mailing these, we're going to hand deliver these. There will be a contingent of Code Pinkers and others that want to go along, and we will travel to the district offices in Portland or Bangor or Waterville of the senators and actually deliver these postcards.
How about our two congressional representatives? You said you met with Mike Michoud. What are Michoud and Pingree saying about this Afghanistan situation?
They have both told me personally, this is a face-to-face meeting, that they do not favor escalation in Afghanistan. They do not believe there is a military solution in Afghanistan, and they are both philosophically opposed to open-ended, war on terror, long war kind of draining the U.S. Treasury, and at the same time seeming to have no real clear goal where once you had gotten there you could say, we know we've achieved it. Congressman Michoud was kind enough to call me personally and tell me that he had voted no on the supplemental war funding bill in my kind of Code Pink role, and to say that he was going to call Congresswoman Pingree and tell her that he was going to vote no and urge her to do the same. And both of them did consistently vote no, and they both also co-sponsored the McGovern Amendment, which was specifically aimed at let's see an exit plan for Afghanistan. So as far as they're telling us, they agree on this particular subject, and they both told me in April that they would love to meet with us during the August recess. I don't have those appointments yet, but I don't have any reason to believe that they are trying to avoid them.
Yeah, that McGovern Amendment, it's trying to set a timeline. It didn't pass.
It didn't pass.
Right. Okay, what have you learned about Afghanistan and the situation there today? What is it about Afghanistan that alarms you so much?
Well, you know, a lot of people are throwing around this phrase graveyard of empires. Afghanistan has a reputation from ancient history through certainly the 20th century as being a place that, because it stands right in that zone of Eurasia where, you know, South Asia touches it and the Middle East touches it and East Asia touches it, it's really a kind of a crossroads. And so from going back to the ancient Persian empires, Alexander the Great, the Roman Empire, and then in the 20th, you know, sort of as turning into the 20th century, the British Empire, everybody has thought, oh, I need Afghanistan, I need to get Afghanistan under control to control my movement of troops, to control the economic activity of that region. And of course, since the 20th century and into the 21st, there are a lot of energy resources in Central Asia, and getting those out into the Arabian Sea or overland through pipelines is tricky, and it involves controlling that area.
And so everyone's been unsuccessful, your point is, in controlling Afghanistan over these years.
And then, ironically, the last empire to try to control Afghanistan was the Soviet Union. And I say ironically because I think most Americans are aware that our government funded and trained the Mujahideen, radical, extremist freedom fighters who resisted the Soviet Union.
And these people are the ones that basically became the Taliban by
well,
another
some
name.
of them became the Taliban, some of them became the Northern Alliance, some of them became other warlords with more, you know, small regional troops and fighters, militias that are loyal to them. It's a very tribal part of the world. The ethnic identities cross borders. The Durand line that the British Empire sort of randomly put and said, well, that's going to be sort of the western reaches of our empire, became Afghanistan's border. It's not a very defensible border. The Pashtun tribe, which the Taliban largely is drawn from, straddles that border and controls the Khyber Pass.
You're talking about the border between Pakistan and Afghanistan?
I'm talking about the border between Pakistan and Afghanistan in the Hindu Kush, which is very rough, rugged, mountainous terrain that's just west of the Himalayan mountains. And the Khyber Pass is the traditional in ancient times. This is where Alexander the Great's army would come through. This is exactly where the Taliban fighters pass back and forth between Pakistan and Afghanistan to this day. America is reaping the effects of having funded and trained these militias, and now attempts to subdue the area itself, and seems to not understand really how that area operates, what's going on there.
Well, President Obama has already begun expanding the number of troops there. And in fact, just this past week, we heard Secretary of War Gates saying that he needs even more troops on top of what Obama has already done in his own surge, if you will. He's appointed a new commander of Afghanistan, Army General Stanley McChrystal. What can you tell us about this new U.S. commander of the war in Afghanistan, McChrystal?
Well, that appointment was certainly a signal that Obama was not a peace president, as some have mischaracterized him. General McChrystal was in charge of special operations in Iraq, counterinsurgency, focus on assassinations, and certainly it's not, it wouldn't represent a new direction. It's similar to keeping Gates as Secretary of Defense. Even McChrystal himself, I had a little quote here I had just seen online. General McChrystal said, "Air power contains the seeds of our own destruction. If we do not use it responsibly, we can lose this fight." I think that would allude to the fact that his understanding of counterinsurgency effective would be find the right guys and take them out. Bombing civilians from the air, even all experts, even on the military side, General Petraeus, the CENTCOM commander, I heard him testify in April to Congress that bombing civilians from the air just creates militants. It just makes the Taliban's recruiting easier, and it's not a good idea. For some reason, we continue using unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, often called drones, to bomb houses that they believe Taliban has gone into this building. But the ratio of civilians killed to Taliban fighters is about 50-1 at this point.
Yeah. Well, wouldn't you say it's a good thing that McChrystal is making this comment, that we want to use less air power and do more selective assassinations? Isn't that a good thing from the standpoint that we're not killing so many civilians? I'm sure some people listening to the show would argue that point with you.
You know, another person that I heard testify to a Senate subcommittee hearing this April was Professor Andrew Bacevich from Boston University, and he studies and teaches about conflict. He has studied the situation in Afghanistan and Iraq pretty closely, and his analysis, which you can see online at the Rethink Afghanistan website, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute, but Andrew Bacevich's testimony was, what you need is a really top-notch international policing, detective effort. This is how you apprehend people like Osama bin Laden. You have to cooperate internationally to do it. You get the very, very best people, and you go in and you arrest those people and you bring them before an international court of law. Bombing or assassinating people always leads to what the American military rather easily calls this collateral damage, as if it was a tree that maybe had been hurt. But a disproportionate number of women and children are actually harmed when we bomb from the air with these supposedly precision weapons. They don't seem very precision to the Afghanis being bombed, I don't think.
Let's talk more about these unmanned aerial vehicles, or drones as you called them, that are today being used in Afghanistan and also in Pakistan. These are pilotless planes flown by American pilots sitting back at bases in the United States, places like Creech Air Force Base outside of Las Vegas, Nevada, where they're sitting in front of a computer screen with a joystick, and these drones that are named the Predator or the Reaper have cameras on board, and they're flying sort of non-stop over this area, sending back through the military satellites in real time, split-second time, images through the satellite all the way back to the pilot there in Las Vegas, Nevada. And he's looking at the screen. Is it Al-Qaeda? Is it Taliban? Is it a wedding? And he can push a button, and then missiles on these drones fire and hit targets on the ground. As you said, killing many civilians, sometimes 50 and 60 at a time in just recent months. Well, interestingly enough, there's been discussion right here in Maine about bringing these drones, these unmanned aerial vehicles, to Brunswick Naval Air Station when the base closes in 2011, and using the Brunswick Naval Air Station runway as a test center. They're calling it the Unmanned Vehicle Test Center. John Richardson, who's the governor's man in charge of economic development for the state, is one of the people pushing this plan. And they say that these things would not only then be tested, but could also be used by Homeland Security to fly up and down the coast, peering at all the boats off the coast, and also spying on the people of Maine. Well, what is your response about, number one, these drones being tested in the Brunswick area, potentially, and then secondly, their use in general in this war effort?
Well, Code Pink has a Ground the Drones campaign right now, and they were part of a demonstration outside Creech Air Force Base just last week, aimed at recognizing that the drones may be killing people in Afghanistan and Pakistan, but someone sitting in a trailer in Nevada in the desert is actually
flying
them and controlling them. So we've communicated with Congresswoman Pingree about our alarm at a possible earmark that she may be asking for just this project. And
at Brunswick Naval Air.
at the Brunswick Naval Air Station, obviously people are worried about job loss. This is always the bugaboo that's raised. When I spoke to Congresswoman Pingree about conversion to peaceful prospects in April, she said, it's all those jobs, and it's very, very hard to make a decision that 7,000 people are employed at Bath Iron Works, or so many thousand people are employed at the Naval Air Station. So I think that we need to help them see that conversion to peaceful processes would be much more to our advantage, and really generates more jobs if you look at the economics of it. But we're very much opposed to Maine becoming even more militarized than it is. It seems like we kind of have one foot in each camp at this point, and it would be a real shame to see us go over to becoming the munitions manufacturing state. I think it poses a security risk, certainly to the citizens of Maine. And
also, what does it say about the soul of us as a state and as a nation, that we have to have endless war in order to create jobs for our people? It's a moral, ethical issue, isn't it, as well?
It's a moral, ethical issue, and it's an argument that uses the false dichotomy. Either we build weapons of mass destruction and employ people using them, or we don't have jobs. That's a false choice, and I don't think we should allow the question to even be framed in that way. As far as drones being used to spy on us in Maine, drones could spy on us in Maine right now. There are 7,000 drones, I think, from what I can tell reading online, that exist already, and there were only a handful 2 years ago. So clearly drones, UAVs, I think is the acronym that military prefers, are in the pipeline to be used for lots of different things. And I would like to see them kept out of Maine, certainly.
What, in your opinion, should we be doing in Afghanistan? If you think the war is a mistake and staying there and expanding the war is a mistake, what should we do? You did mention sort of an international policing force, but what about the poverty? What about the way women are treated? All the other issues, democracy, we're bringing democracy to the people of Afghanistan. What should the U.S. policy be in the region?
Well, I'm glad that you brought up about the rights of women, because currently, right now, there's a fairly heated debate about the fact that the escalation in Afghanistan is being justified as women still need their rights. And if we allow the Taliban to come back to power, they will live under this very oppressive regime. And it's not imaginary that it's oppressive. Afghani women will testify that the Supreme Court under Karzai, the Chief Justice of the Afghani Supreme Court, was recently televised saying women have two rights under the new Afghani constitution. This is the one that our tax dollars have put in place. They have the right to obey their husband, and they have the right to pray, although not in the mosques, because that would be going out in public. They aren't allowed to get an education. And we all hear those horror stories, and they're true, of the Taliban dumping acid on young girls on the way to school, simply because they're trying to get an education. But the real truth of the matter is that since the U.S. invaded Afghanistan, 8 years ago now, women's rights have not improved in Afghanistan. That's the new Supreme Court talking. And now they're living in a war zone as well. So one of the things that Code Pink focuses on is trying to hear from the women of these war zones, their own voices, going there if necessary, using video projects like Rethink Afghanistan to gather the testimony of women in Afghanistan, some of whom are risking their lives to say, what's really going on. And there seems to be a clear consensus that our lives have gotten worse under war, not better, and our rights have not increased either. So now we're at risk of violence too. As far as the aid question, most counterinsurgency intelligence says it should be 90% aid and 10% military, yet we just passed a funding bill that's 90% military and 10% aid. And even that 10% of the aid barely reaches Afghanistan. It's contracted out to a U.S. corporation and subcontracted. So what the Afghani women are saying is, where is that electricity and that running water that we were going to get? We're not seeing it.
It's not happening. Let me ask you this. You made a reference earlier to pipelines through Afghanistan. So do you think there's a connection, maybe that we're in Afghanistan not so much because of women's rights and democracy and trying to find Osama bin Laden, and that it might have something to do with the oil coming out of the Caspian Sea region, which is just north of Afghanistan, like in Turkmenistan, bordering on the Caspian Sea. I've seen references for years now that they want to build pipelines to move that oil through Pakistan and Afghanistan and Pakistan into the Arabian Sea. You think there's some truth to that?
Well, certainly. Central Eurasia is the place on the globe where the oil and gas reserves, the big reserves, still are. And you have Russia, and you have China, and you have the United States and Britain sort of working in concert. And all three of those big powers would like to get their hands on the last fossil fuel energy reserve. So I think sometimes it may be as much of a keeping the other guy from getting it as it is we're going to put the pipeline and bring the oil down. But for centuries now, controlling that area has been key to any major empire that wants to operate in that.
So we're nearing the end of the show, Lisa. What can people listening to the show do to help?
Well, one thing that is really worth doing is visiting the website rethinkafghanistan.com. They have been making a video documentary with testimony from a wide variety of Afghani people about what's really going on there. I can't stress enough what a great education tool that would be. You can visit Code Pink for Peace, that would be a number 4.org, and check out what we're doing in Maine when we have activities. There's a calendar there that would let you know what's going on. And then if you are interested in joining our lobbying coalition, that would be super. On August 1st, following the Bath Iron Works event in the morning, there's going to be a meeting at the Adams Melman, am I saying it right, house in Bath. About noon, and we're going to continue discussing our organizing around lobbying for Afghanistan.
You're talking about the christening. There's going to be another christening at BIW on August 1st, and there'll be the usual vigil that'll be held outside of that christening.
That's right, and I'm going to attend that, and I've been asked to speak. Jack Bussell of Veterans for Peace is the organizer of that event, but we have an organizing meeting following that, and any peace activists from around the state, whether they were there for the June meeting or have participated before, that want to join with us in meeting with Congress and talking about our concerns about escalating Afghanistan.
And if someone wanted to reach you, do you have a phone number that you could?
I do. My number is 643-2356. That's in Solon, Maine.
Say it again.
643-2356.
643-2356.
And I'm on Facebook as myself, and also Code Pink Maine has a Facebook page if you're a Facebook person.
Great. Well, why don't you take just a minute and give us a little wrap-up closing statement before we have to close the show.
War is not healthy for children and other living things. Violence just begets violence, and if you want to know what Code Pink believes in, it is that we all want to work as hard as possible and have fun doing it and cooperate amongst ourselves to communicate to our government that we don't want endless war funded. Let's spend the war on health care. Let's spend the war money on health care, on building public transportation, on green energy, on life-sustaining projects rather than bombing people from the skies with robot drones.
All right. Well, Lisa Savage, thank you very much for coming on the show. We appreciate it. And thank you for watching another edition of This Issue. Until next time, good luck to you all, and please get organized.